Okay, and it is now 4 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Jane Hershey, and I want to welcome you to the CitySprouts Teacher Forum. I'm really delighted to be here on a beautiful spring day. Finally, spring is arriving and the start of our new growing season. And this is our final webinar of the spring in the CitySprouts Teacher Forum series. And we are so glad to have everyone join us as we host teachers sharing lessons with other teachers, along with parents and outdoor educators and lots of others who are all committed to children learning in the garden and learning from the garden. Our webinars showcase some really excellent ways that teachers are using their school garden for instruction. But as we've also learned in this series, there are lots of ways that the garden impacts children besides just the knowledge that they get from a lesson. Time in the garden is spent building class community, establishing a culture of respect and curiosity among children, and really supporting children's healthy social emotional development as well. In the past few webinars, we've heard from teaching staff at the King Open Elementary School in Cambridge and our garden coordinator there, Erin Taylor, and learned about some of the ways that the school garden is used to center children's energy, help them focus and find ways to really positively contribute back to their school community. That was a great webinar that our staff have been talking about since then. Last week, we heard from 4 educators in Boston at the David Ellis Elementary School who all used their school garden for writing, with some really amazing samples of student work from that webinar. All of these are archived on our website and available for download, and I encourage you to go take a look at them and check them out. We here at CitySprouts really hope that these stories are inspiring you and your questions, your comments about integrating the garden with a lesson outside or bringing the garden into the classroom, both of which we consider garden-based learning. We hope that you consider this webinar today an invitation to go out to the garden, talk about it, start more conversations, and find out ways that you can make this a real active part of your students' learning. So here I am, Jane Hershey, and I direct the CitySprouts program. We are a school garden program in Cambridge and in Boston now too. We've been in Cambridge for the past 15 years and more recently added 4 Boston public school partnerships. We help to build and support these edible gardens as an instructional resource, and also as a way to connect young people to nature and food systems where they live and learn. So just a few reminders about our webinar platform today. We're recording today's session, and the recording will be posted on our website, and you'll be able to find them all on the Teacher Forum page at citysprouts.org. Except for the presenters and me, everyone's audio has been muted to limit background noise. But that doesn't mean we don't want your questions. And there's that chat box down in the corner. There's a message from Mike and a message from me. Make sure that your settings are set to everyone. Type in a message and press return and let us know who's on the call. And also let us know any questions you have. I will be your voice. So after we've heard from presenters, or even while we're hearing from presenters, if you type in your questions, I'll be sure that they get heard. We remember that the teachers here and the educators on all of these webinars are really eager to hear your questions. They have so much more material than just what they're presenting, so please be sure and ask. And now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our first guest speaker, Marion Dunn, who is the Junior K-8 Science Instructional Coach for Cambridge Public Schools. Welcome, Marion.
Welcome. Thank you, Jane. Welcome to all the participants today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the overview of the science curriculum and connecting to the garden in Cambridge at all 12 of our schools. We obviously are going to change over to the new Massachusetts standards. So what we have put together are some things that we've been doing for the past few years with our garden connections. But we do have activities or lessons that actually can be done in JK, K, first, second, third, fourth, and 5th grades, and I know Elika and Louisa are going to talk more about their specific grades. In Cambridge, we give all the students science notebooks, and we actually encourage all the teachers to take the students out to do science sketching in the garden because it's looking at real objects. It's different than obviously sketching in art, and getting them to be more accurate in their sketching and to label their sketching. So usually they kick off in the fall, many of the grades, doing a sketching activity using the garden. So we'll move over to the new standards. Next year we'll start working with the new Massachusetts standards for 1st grade and 4th grade. And we're also going to be running some professional development for teachers, focusing on some of the practices for the new standards. Since they are in the spirit, they're connected to the next generation science standards, but Massachusetts didn't adopt them. So we have same kinds of performance-based assessments as well as the practices. So we're hoping that the practices are a way in for teachers to start using some of the resources that we have right here at the school, like our garden, for asking questions, developing and using models, planning and carrying out investigations, analyzing and interpreting data, using mathematics and computational thinking, constructing explanations, engaging in argument from evidence, and then obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. Those are the 8 practices, and we see that the garden can be an integral part of getting students to be aware of the kinds of thinking that scientists do and the kinds of practices that scientists engage in when they are working with new ideas in science.
So Marianne, I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute because I think there is a photograph of the garden coming up.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If you move your slide forward, we'll be able to, there we go.
Okay.
We didn't want to miss it.
Okay. This is one of our gardens at the Kennedy Longfellow School in Cambridge, and actually, we had some middle schoolers when they were there create some signs for some of our gardens as part of a biodiversity project. But the gardens at the JK5, we encourage the teachers to actually connect with their garden coordinator to actually take some of their lessons out into the garden. So for instance, we have the junior K curriculum is called Nature and Me, and the kindergarten curriculum is Organisms, 1st grade Living Things, 2nd grade Soils, 3rd grade Plants, 4th grade Weathering and Erosion we can do in and around the garden. And in 5th grade, we do, it's an overview year, looking back at the past 5 years, and we use the garden quite extensively for plants, for science sketching, for earth science, looking back at soils, so that students can be refreshed of different new experiences before they take MCAS. I want to pull up the garden in the science curriculum so you can actually see. So you see where it says lesson 1, students could, oops, sorry, hang on a second. So lesson 1, the garden connection would be that the class could visit the garden and go on an introductory tour with the garden coordinator or the teacher, and really you can see we have no materials really needed. The garden coordinator could lead the tour if necessary. So we have set these up for a number of our units. This one in particular is grade 3, where we actually do plants. So I know that, for instance, at one of our schools, they were using the garden exclusively for this particular unit. They weren't even using the FAST plants that come along with the STC, which is the purchase curriculum that we have. But they were taking this garden connection document and using the actual lessons in the teacher's guide and holding them in the garden and planting things. So really, it's about making promoting the garden and making it aware for teachers that they can actually take those lessons that are written as if you could do them in the classroom and do them outside, which is really exciting for the students because they're actually, seeing the plants, especially in the fall, they're seeing the plants and the seeds that are there, or in the spring, they're seeing being able to plant things. And I know even in the wintertime, we've planted things with the 1st graders outside just before the winter, before the garden coordinators go off. We've planted, I think it's garlic with them out there with Brad. Another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is we have also done adult learning experiences when teachers or principals have asked. The science department has partnered with the CitySprouts coordinator and Jane, the director, and we've offered some professional development during early release days or different after-school times where teachers can come from a specific school and we actually work in the garden and do these kinds of lessons and show teachers exactly how they might want to do them, or we get teachers to lead other teachers, facilitate some of that professional development for them. Just in wrapping up, I think that it's going to be a challenge for us to figure out how we go forward with using the garden with the new standards, and we haven't really given that we've done a quick look at first grade and fourth grade, but they're really different, the standards that are coming out now that we have to implement. So we're working on that with our staff and teachers.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. And I just want to say, for those listening, you may not have realized this yet, but Marianne is working as a science coach for the district. And to have this kind of support from the district, from a public school district for garden-based learning is just phenomenal. It's really, we are used to this kind of thoughts about the garden and use of the garden from teachers or from outside partners like CitySprouts. But Cambridge is really such a unique place to have this kind of commitment to garden-based learning from inside as well. So, Marianne, I just want to thank you and your staff for really being pioneers and leading the way and thinking about how to make garden-based learning part of how you support teachers.
Oh, you're welcome. And that's key for me when I have a new teacher that's in first grade or second grade, to really provide access to the garden and make it very rich learning experience. So I tend to go with the new teachers when they use the garden and touch base with the garden coordinators to make sure that we're all collaborating together, and the teachers feel much more comfortable with another adult, obviously, and 20 kindergartners or first graders out there for the very first time as a new teacher in Cambridge. So, and the garden coordinators can be a huge assistance to the new teachers, especially providing them, for instance, looking at seeds, collecting seeds in the fall so we have them for the spring, or looking at compost. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that with our soils unit. So there's a number of ways that if you're a new teacher in Cambridge, we can bring that garden to you and your students, even if you might be a little unsure of the curriculum when you first start. But the experienced teachers have done amazing things going out there, as far as I can tell and see, on their own, and really integrating it and weaving it into their science curriculum as well as their humanities curriculum and social studies. And so I see it sort of being great for project-based learning as well as integrating it into a variety of other subject content areas too.
That's great, thank you. And I know we've got a few Boston teachers on our webinar today too, so teachers who use the garden. So I hope that you all are taking notes about what you can and should ask for from your own Boston Public School District. This is really a great inspiration, and I really think something all teachers need. So thanks again, Marianne.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. I am Elika Fredrickson. I am a kindergarten teacher at the Amigos School, and this year I have a mixed class. I have half of them are JKs and the other half are kindergarten students. And this is my 5th year of working in Cambridge, and I have to tell you that every year the way we use the garden and what we learn from the garden changes just as the students in our class change. And so when I was asked to do this webinar, I was really thinking about how to present what we do in kindergarten, and I started thinking about how we use the garden from September through the end of the school year. And so what I wanted to do was just give you a little information about how our garden use changes throughout the year. So in September, we start our time in the garden together with a focus on what it means to be naturalists. Kindergarten-age children, young children, have inquiring minds and are natural scientists. They enter school with attitudes, and such as curiosity, and also they're trying to figure out who they are, and skills that make them enthusiastic about learning about the natural and physical worlds. They wonder about how things work and why things change, and want to experiment, touch, and see what happens. Learning about science and using our garden during this fall period really builds on to the kindergarten child's development. And as you can see on this slide pictured, we really use the garden in the spring and again in the fall and then again in the spring. But actually what I'm going to talk about is how is how our garden, we can use the garden throughout the year in kindergarten, in our kindergarten class. So our first month in the garden is one of simply exploration. Children are given tools to be scientists and to investigate with their senses, with magnifying glasses, and their science notebooks for recording and sketching. I work closely with the garden coordinator to create a sensory space in the garden, access to the compost bin, and in previous years we were able to have a special digging space that the students were able to go out to with shovels. The main role of the garden coordinator and the teachers at the beginning of the year is really just to watch the children play in the garden and make observations on what they're interested in. And we use this information to really plan our lessons for the remainder of the year. So some examples of lessons we've done based on children's interests are we've had a unit on colors in the garden where children have been able to go outside and sketch and draw different colors that they've seen. We've planted and grown plants, we've measured, we've brought some of our math materials outside, and in October we do a special apple cider pressing. So in October we are using the unit in Cambridge called Me, Myself, and Others. Here the garden becomes a space where we learn to get along and enjoy each other's learning styles. We play games in the garden that promote social and emotional development, such as Bluebird Through My Window and partner sketches with the plants and animals. And as you see in the picture, our apple cider pressing is a highlight of our work in October. So students come to the garden together along with their families, and they work in groups of 5 and rotate through 3 different stations. And this is organized by our garden coordinator. So students work together to wash the apples, cut the apples, press the apples, and afterwards we all sit down to enjoy our delicious cider with friends and family. So becoming scientists in kindergarten. As the year progresses, we focus on 2 main themes for our science curriculum. During the cold winter months, when the garden is dormant, our science shifts to studying sand and water. Here, our students explore the physical properties of water and sand and how each moves. We still incorporate the garden through visits and recordings in our journal of what happened to the plants and animals during winter. This year, we actually had a fascinating project develop with one of our JK classes. The students were playing at recess one cold day in this really long winter, and one student managed to dig far enough down in the snow to reach the soil of one of our garden beds. Well, he paused in his digging. He was very perplexed, and he came up to one of his teachers and he said, you know, why are there no plants here? But at my dad's office, I see lots of plants growing outside. Well, this question prompted further investigation, as our winter this year certainly didn't have any growth outside, at least. And we realized that he had noticed a greenhouse located outside of his dad's office. And of course, inside a greenhouse, plants can grow. The children in this JK class were fascinated by the idea that plants can continue to grow even in the wintertime. This prompted a full-on exploration of how greenhouses work. They visited several local greenhouses in Cambridge and learned enough to make 3 small greenhouses to cover up the garden beds at the Amigo school until the weather turned warm. This incredible project was a sure result of the time we spent investigating and exploring how gardens work in the fall. The spring brings the sun and our unit on living things and organisms in kindergarten. Again, we started weekly visits to the garden. Now that our kindergarten students are a little older, lessons are focused on main questions that the group figures out. We ask questions, we define problems, and they work together in groups to really carry out their investigations. Our class this year, at this time, is actually growing different types of plants, and we have a competition to see which plant they predict will grow the fastest. And right now we're growing some garlic and some bean plants in the garden and some different types of flowers. As our garden in Amigos is very small, we have also started an indoor garden space in our classroom where children have access to a small digging table filled with soil and seeds for their exploration. And this is something that we've been able to do in partnership with our garden coordinator at Amigos. Well, it's important to note that every year is different, like I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. Our main focus as kindergarten teachers and garden coordinators working with the young children is really following their interests. This year we talked about the greenhouses with them, and I'm really excited to see what projects next year will bring with their kindergarten class. And I'm going to pass the phone over to Louisa, our second grade teacher.
Okay, thank you, Elika. Before you begin, Louisa, I just want to say others may have as many comments and questions about what Elika's stories as I do. So please, you can type them in at the bottom as Erin has done, or you can just save them and ask them, type them in at the end. But that was an amazing story, Elika, about following the questions that kids had to to develop a whole project-based learning that came out of that. So we're going to come back and ask you those questions after Louisa speaks, but I just wanted to jump in there and thank you and make sure that other teachers also were keeping track of the questions that they were going to have at the end. Okay, welcome, Louisa.
Good afternoon. My name is Luisa Quintanilla. I'm the second grade Spanish teacher at the Amigo School. I want to say that the Amigo School is a dual immersion school. We teach Spanish and in English. I'm the Spanish teacher. So I find that the gardening is very helpful in making hands-on activities come alive for the students, especially for those who are learning a second language. In second grade, we have the soils unit as well as living things. And my role in working with the garden coordinator and using the garden is to make a connection between the soils unit as well as living things. One of the things that we do a lot is observe and draw the plants and the soil beds. In the soils unit, we study different types of soil, sand, clay, humus. So one of the questions that sometimes students ask and wonder, can plants grow in sand? And one of the activities that we have is that you have a mixed soil that helps the plants grow better. So that activity in the classroom, and then when we take it to the garden, it makes it very real because they can really observe the type of soil that each bed has. They can see a little bit of sand in there, they can feel the humus in there, and the clay is kind of hard to find in there. But it makes it come alive and making that connection to the activities that we do in the classroom and into the garden. One of the biggest things that we do is compost. Every student does a compost bag in the classroom, but then we also go to the garden and they get to explore and observe the compost bin. They can feel the warmth that is happening there in the compost bin, something that you're not able to do with a little bag in the classroom. Also, we observe the seeds that we planted in different types of soils, as I said earlier. And drawing is very important for second grade because they're used to drawing in art, but this is a more scientific, more realistic way of drawing. So students, instead of using pencils, we use color pencil. If the leaf is green, use a green color pencil. That way it's easier. You don't have to do it twice. And it's really helpful for the students to be able to have those color pencils. So meeting with Brad and other coordinators that I worked in the past is very important. I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. And in the past, when we were in another building, our garden was huge. And when we moved to this new building, we only have 5 beds, raised beds. So Brad and I met to plan the activities. And we decided, like I think the first time that we went with the whole class, and we had 24 kids and 5 beds. It was really challenging. So after that, we decided that it would be best if we did stations. So I think it was a trial and error, and it was give and take, his suggestions, my suggestions, and we coordinated very well. So we decided that we would have 3 stations. And we divided the students into 3 groups. I kept about 16 students in my classroom, and then I sent the other group with Brad, because also behavior issues, because, you know, you have to take into account also behavior issues that sometimes we have. So I also included my assistant to go and help out Brad when we had kids who needed that extra reminders to stay on task and to follow the rules. And Brad created a couple of recording sheets, and it's great that the garden has clipboards. I provided the magnifying glasses and the color pencils. So they would sit down and say, okay, what am I bringing? What are the students bringing from my classroom? What do you already have in there, in order to be very clear, so that when the students left my classroom, they already had the pencils, they had the magnifying glass, and then Brad would give them the clipboards. So I think coordinating from activities to the actual material that you need is important, and who's providing them is also important. So one of the outcomes is that students get very excited about going to the garden, and they always are learning something new, whether it's living things crawling in there that you wouldn't see that in the soil that we had in the classroom. And also for some students, it was very calming to go to the garden. So that's, you know, one of the students said, oh, I felt very calm going to the garden. And they were always exciting, including helping Brad, I think, setting up the beds, you know, cleaning, pulling weeds. So it's not only doing the activities that are linked to the unit, but also things that you would do to take care of living things. And what I find it very valuable going to the garden, as opposed to just having the activities in the classroom, is that it makes it that science is real, it's surrounding us, it's everywhere. It's not just something that we do in the classroom. Soil is in the garden. It helps us grow plants. And also beginning to consider, okay, which soil is much better to grow a specific kind of plant, including the sun, which plants need more sunlight than others. And the composting, I think, it's excellent because the students can see the worms crawling in there, and they can see how the living matter has decomposed. And so it's really exciting for them to see that the apple that was there, when they look at it again, it has disintegrated and it has become a part of the soil. So I think that's recommendations. I think it's important to have a mini lesson about how scientists draw scientific illustrations with color pencils, because you want students to be more observant about the details that each plant has, or what the soil looks like, the rocks look like. So I think that is one of the things that I would recommend. And I think working with your coordinator, it's a give and take. And I think one of the great things that was really helpful for me that Brad did is, like, after we met, he would type up the notes and send them to me. And I was like, yes, that's what I wanted. So I think having that is clarifying what my expectations were and what his expectations were, so we were on the same page. So that was very helpful after meeting.
Great. Thank you so much, Luisa. We've got lots of questions down there, so don't go far away, because after Brad speaks, we have lots more that we want to learn. But I really appreciate that great explanation, and I love your science is everywhere. What a great thought to hold in mind as we move on to Brad. Here you go, Brad.
Great, thank you. My name is Brad Pillen. I'm a former CitySprouts garden coordinator at the Amigos School. And I worked there the past 2 years and worked a lot with both Elka and Luisa and a number of other teachers. So I'm going to talk a bit just about sort of the plan of the garden and the layout of the garden, and then also just elaborate a little bit more on the collaboration and the planning that I did with different teachers, and specifically Elka and Luisa. So as Luisa was talking about, one of the challenges about the Amigos garden is it's a little bit limited in space. They used to have a very large garden, and now with the new school site, they only have 5 raised beds. And last year, we also added some hanging woolly pockets on the fence to try and add some more growing space as well. But because of that, because of limited space, we're not able to give each class or each grade sort of their own area of the garden to use or to plan in as they please, which in some schools is the case. So because most of the garden use comes from the kindergarten through 2nd grade, most of the planting in the garden and the planning for it was focused around what those grades wanted or what they could benefit from the most versus grades 3 to 5, mostly just because they did use it more. So this resulted in having plants that were both quick growing, so radish is an example of that, and also plants that you could see a lot of change in their growth from week to week. So planting pole beans and also peas early in the spring. That way when classes come out on a weekly basis, they can see a lot of change, and also with the plants that grow quickly and are ready to harvest quickly, we're able to plant in the beginning of the season, and then also with the goal of being able to harvest that by the end of the season. So a really important key in the Amigos garden is using it for sensory awareness activities. In particular, this is something that kindergarten classes focus a lot on. So we have an herb garden, which offers a lot of different smells. I know just for example, we typically have mint, lavender, rosemary, sage, and a number of other different herbs and things that you can notice different smells from. Plants that have different textures. So for example, squash plants that have sort of prickly vines and leaves versus something like lamb's ear, which is very soft. A lot of different colors with different flowers in the perennial garden, a lot of flowers in the hanging woolly pockets, and also noticing different leaf shapes, and also obviously tasting, which is often the student's favorite sense to explore. So making a point of having different plants that students can get different senses from. The compost is also a very useful tool, in particular at the Amigos garden. Due to the small space, compost is very often the station that a number of students can go and explore, help turn, and sort of sift through to find different decomposing plants as well as different animals and decomposers living in the compost bin. In particular, the Amigos compost has always been very active, mostly due to classes bringing worms from indoor worm bins out to the compost. I know Luisa's class has done this in the past, and I believe other classes may as well. So it's just very nice that it helps keep decomposers living in the compost bin and also makes it a very active and useful component of the garden for classes to use, and especially using as a station when an entire class comes out, so that we have different students working in different areas. This was also in particular useful for third grade, which it's some part of the curriculum studies habitats, so they can come in and use the garden as a whole, but also specifically the compost, and they can really explore habitats using the compost bin. So as Luisa was mentioning, starting with first grade, so Amigos is a Spanish immersion school, so starting with first grade, the teachers switch students on a weekly basis. So this adds a little bit of a different dimension to trying to plan with teachers than is the case in a lot of other schools where this doesn't happen. So because of this, I would plan with Luisa a little bit different and other first grade and up teachers than I did with kindergarten teachers and also with teachers at other schools. So as Luisa was mentioning, usually at the beginning of the season, excuse me, her and I would sit down and we would essentially map out all of the activities that we were going to be doing in the garden for the remainder of the season. So due to her both sharing the unit and the standards they were trying to teach to, we would brainstorm different activities that we could use and try and map out 3 or 4 different activities and then to schedule visits for both classes to come out to the garden to do, which would typically result in between 6 and 8 visits for her students, with each group of students getting 3 to 4 visits to come out. By comparison, working with Elke and the other kindergarten teachers, they have the same students throughout the entire year. They don't switch students like the other grades do. So we would, as she described, meet in the beginning of the season, and we would talk a bit about what she wanted to do with the students. We would sort of have a general theme of planting, coming out on a weekly basis to observe, to measure, to sketch, and then also having the intent to hopefully harvest and eat what they planted by the end of the season. So this gave us a little bit more flexibility in that we had a general plan of what we wanted to happen throughout the few months of either the spring or the fall, but it also gave us the option as things changed or as there were certain jobs to do, or as she had different activities that she wanted to do with the students, gave us more flexibility to not have to plan such a rigid plan for each visit can be challenging when you're dealing with a garden, and there's a lot of variables that go into when things are ready and when certain jobs are ready to be happen. So just two different approaches to trying to make a plan for different teachers to come out throughout the season and to be able to best use it for what they're hoping to get out of it. And Jane, I believe that's all for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brad. And we've got lots of great questions down here. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. Marianne, are you still in the group at the Amigos?
Yep, I am.
Great. First question for you is, so we had a question about what are some of the entry activities or first suggestions that you offer to new teachers in Cambridge using the garden for the first time?
Well, the first thing is to partner with the garden coordinator to do a tour of the garden, and also to think about the units that they have planned out for the fall and the spring, especially when the garden coordinator's there. So we promote a lot with the sketching just as a first step, you know, to get students out there doing some scientific illustration, labeling the plants, or and then you can spread them out throughout the garden, even the smaller gardens like at Amigos 13 where they're the raised beds. Also, just like Brad was saying, and I think Alec was saying, whatever needs to be done in the garden, you know, I encourage teachers, let's talk to the garden coordinator and see what has to be done. You're doing living organisms, but right now maybe we need to do something with the compost, or maybe we were doing the garlic scapes. I think we were planting in the fall. So we would just check with the garden coordinator to see what kinds of maintenance things or what kinds of things had to be done in the garden, because I think that Louisa made a really good point about contextualizing it for students, that this isn't just about the school garden. This is if you have a garden at home or if you have any kind of garden, these are the kinds of things that need to be done. And then again, we are flexible about how tightly linked it is to our curriculum. We're just saying, yes, there's a teacher plan, there's an outline, there's student sheets, but we can also modify anything that's given in our science curriculum to work for the students or the teachers in their learning experiences that, you know, sort of either hit those standards or hit those practices.
Yeah, that's great. And it's really great to hear you say, as a science educator, that the maintenance is a really valuable experience for the kids, that you can build real science practices out of that. It doesn't have to be, you know, a more traditional lesson in the garden, that you can use those authentic experiences and they can be quite valuable for teachers and for kids.
Well, in addition, I think you can come back into the classroom and do some more with what you've actually experienced in the garden. Do you know what I mean? So you have this experiential lesson, perhaps. It's more experiential and the kids are excited and maybe they're doing a little sketching there, or maybe they're coming back into the classroom and having a science talk about what kinds of things did we find in the garden. And sometimes teachers will bring in some objects from the garden, and then we'll sit around on the rug and talk a little bit more about what part of the plant is this, or what, you know, this is actual seed, you know, when you find an acorn. So you can do some collecting of things out there too, and then keeping that up throughout the year as you go out in the garden and add to that chart with whatever you might have found in the garden.
We have another question here, which I think is perhaps a segue from that, and this is for you, Louisa. There's a question about what makes a good learning tool for English language learners in the garden. What thing or what experience? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. I mean, I do teach in Spanish, but it's the same concept can be applied to any language. I think it makes it very concrete. I mean, often I have like pictures, you know, from Google images showing the different plants that we have with the names of worms, the word worms, and they have the pictures. So before we begin to do the unit, I'm upfronting the vocabulary, but with Google images. Once they go to the garden, they can see the actual living things, the actual worms, the actual plants, the actual soil, and rocks or anything that of any kind, like either, you know, leaf, apples. So I think it makes it more concrete, and I'm teaching in Spanish, and I would say that 70% of the population that we have is English speaking, and maybe 30% Spanish speaking. So I'm teaching Spanish as a second language, and I'm doing all the science in Spanish, and when they go to the garden, they get to hear it in English. So it's like a connection with what I'm doing in Spanish to the English language that they hear it from Brad. And although they're expected that when they go to the garden, they have to record it and they have to write it in Spanish, but they hear it in English from Brad, which is good for kids who are learning English as a second language. And for those who are learning Spanish as a second language, it's like hearing, oh, lombrices in English is worms. So I think it makes it very concrete as opposed to just showing images. Now you can feel what the stem, the leaf feels like and what it looks like, that the colors are more vibrant and real than as opposed to the images.
Oh, that's wonderful. So in essence, you're saying the whole garden is the learning tool for language learners, regardless of the language. That's a great image. Elika, I have a question for you. Two questions, actually. One is, so I just love the story of your student discovering the frozen soil under the snow and that leading to, it sounds like, a long and very deep and expansive project about how plants grow. The question from one of our listeners is about, do you provide any big picture questions to prompt your students wondering? I know in that case, the student wondered all on his own, but in other cases, do you provide those big picture questions?
We do, definitely. Especially in September when we're starting our time in the garden, we start by explaining to our children what are naturalists, what do they do, what do scientists do. Scientists ask questions, scientists investigate, and we give them big picture questions such as what kinds of things will you find in the garden, how do plants grow, what do plants need. So we do provide the big picture questions, but our focus really is on finding what interests the children. And so if a child is really interested in learning about different types of soil, or if they're interested in studying about the insects that are in the soil and the plants, we direct our questions so that we can really focus on their interests.
Yeah, that's marvelous. And so another question for you, Elika. Boone wonders about the two games that you mentioned, that you talked about. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes, I do.
She wonders if you could just explain those a little bit more.
Sure. So we love the garden space as a place in our playground to come and do social games together. It's just a really nice space outside, really, with the garden beds and the beautiful flowers and the plants that are growing in the fall and again in the spring. And so we do a lot of our social emotional games there. And some of them we try to do during our garden time. So one that I didn't mention when I talked before, but I was thinking about it, we do a scavenger hunt with our kindergarten students, and this is something that actually Brad helped me develop a few years ago in the garden. They work in partners, and they do a scavenger hunt, finding bugs, finding flowers, finding different types of leaves, and they work together to complete a little scavenger hunt on a chart paper, and that's a really fun game for them to do together. And then we also do a lot of language games in Amigos in Spanish, and we bring our songs to the garden that directly relate to things that are growing in the garden. So, for example, we have a song, I'll say it in English, it's Bluebird, but it's a well-known song where the bluebird flies through your window and the children stand in a circle, and there's a bluebird and the bluebird flies through their windows. And the children love playing that in the garden because we talk about what kind of animals we see, and oftentimes we'll see birds in the garden, and then we come outside and we play the game Bluebird.
Oh, that's really lovely. And another, there's seeing more and more questions cascading towards you, Elika. So you talked also about an indoor garden that you started, and I was really impressed that you actually have an indoor garden that also has a digging space. Itonia, teacher from Boston, had some questions about how did you start your indoor garden? I think she's maybe thinking about how she might start one for her students in Boston too.
Yes, so every classroom, a kindergarten classroom, should have access to a water table. And so in my classroom, what we did is in the wintertime, it's filled with water, and we do all of our water-related exploration tasks. But then in the springtime, I take the water out and I replace it with soil, and provide the students seeds and rakes, small rakes, and watering cans, and it becomes a communal gardening space and a sensory space for the children to just come together and grow things in the soil together. It's a really nice area. They love to do it during our choice time. In addition to that, we also have little planting boxes for every child in the class to grow different types of herbs and different types of flowers, and those have their names on it, and they get to come and water them and take notes also during our center time. So there's two different spaces. There's the communal garden plot that we're doing, and then the individual plots. And every year we're learning more ways to incorporate garden spaces in the classroom.
That's so wonderful to hear. Greg had an addition to that answer to Itonia. He said that leafy vegetables and herbs are great things to start in the garden, and those were some of the things that Elika was mentioning. Greg also mentioned that cilantro is a fun thing, good thing to grow because it's got two edible parts to it. Both the leaves and the seeds are edible. So those are a place to get started, and a great thing to ask your garden coordinator to help you get started with. We've been thought of ourselves in the many years that CitySprouts has been around as sort of Johnny Appleseed carriers, taking a great idea from one teacher and then taking it to another and planting it in another classroom, giving it to a different teacher. And one of our great hopes for this webinar, and this is our inaugural year for it, was that teachers would be able to talk directly with each other and see some of just the amazing work that you're doing and amazing ideas that you're making come to fruition, so to speak, in each classroom. So this is the last webinar of our series. We've got a great archive this year of some of these amazing lessons that I'm describing, including the ones that we heard about today and the Boston teachers last week. I would just like to hold out this hope, well, I hope it's a little bit more than a fantasy, but that teachers might actually be able to visit in person each other's gardens and see some of these things. Elika, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thinking, wow, if I could only make a trip to your classroom and see that digging area and see those plants or see some of the student work. So perhaps next year we'll be able to take it from the virtual webinar to somewhere where teachers can actually visit each other and see some of these amazing spaces and activities that you've created. So thank you all. Thank you so much, Marianne and Elika and Louisa and Brad for ending our first year and our spring season of webinars with some really great examples and stories and illustrations about how garden-based learning can make such a difference in your teaching for your students. I want to remind everybody who's on the call today that you will get professional development credit for being part of this conversation. You'll get a certificate mailed to you. If you are also signed up with your district, you can get district credit from Cambridge and from Boston as well. If you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to be in touch with Mike Hashey, and he can help you out. And we're beginning our don't think about the fall yet. Think about the spring and this great growing season that we've got ahead of us. Thank you all so much for being part of our webinar, and we hope you have a fabulous growing season with lots of kids and plants in your gardens, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall. Thank you all, and goodbye.